Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Walton Gansky, who apparently can't remember how to turn his microphone on after accidentally muting it. And I'm coming to you from Central California, where next week it'll be 111 degrees. It's scorching up here. And sorry about the microphone thing. I was trying to work the room and chat at the same time.
I thought it was funny. I thought it was a rather long, pregnant pause, but I thought it was dramatic effect. You were just waiting and waiting to make a big entrance. So, and
well,
that you did.
I show up to parties late, stuff. So just a way of getting attention.
Yeah. Yeah, it is warm. I saw on somebody's Facebook feed it was 120 degrees, and I laughed at them. I said, "Suckers, it's only 119 here." Losers. But it's warm pretty much everywhere, and so we hope wherever you are that you are staying cool. Reminder to those of you listening to the audio only cast, you can watch us live 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Google Hangouts. You can add us to firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Add us to your circles, and then you'll get notifications of when we are recording. And if you are watching on YouTube, thank you very much. Please don't forget to hit that thumbs up button, that like button. Does a lot of good for us. So keep those coming in. And thanks to all of you who are listening live with us tonight. You'll notice Molly Jo did not introduce herself tonight, mainly because she's not on. And there's a reason for that. She's still having some computer issues and some internet issues, but she does send this lovely, lovely text. And so I'm going to read it because she, as the good producer that she is, has given me a list of things to remember to announce, which I will summarily forget if I don't read it. So here's what she says. She says, I should remember to mention to the audience that I will be in Bakersfield next week at the California Writers Club, Bakersfield branch there, the Kern County branch of the California Writers Club, be talking about first lines. So that's where I'll be. And Molly Jo will be there the following month to talk about social media. This last weekend, I was at the Greater Los Angeles Writers Conference, which was a lot of fun. It met some great people there, read some great pages, and had a lot of fun. So if you were there and you're watching us now, thanks so much for coming out to that. It was awesome to be able to talk to you guys. Hope that you guys will continue to tune in and listen and learn about fiction. Let's see, anything else? Oh, Molly posted a monthly blog on Edie Melson's blog called 5 Simple Ways Counting Kittens Can Boost Your Blog Traffic, which sounds almost too adorable. So we'll have to make sure that we check that out. That should be at the Write Conversation, WRITE, the writeconversation.com, I believe is where that is. And if you get a chance and you've read any of our books, please make sure that you leave a review of them on Amazon or Goodreads. That does help us out as well. So I think that's it. Molly tells me that she's going to be watching later on YouTube to verify that I remembered to announce everything. So I'm going to do the rest of the cast in abject terror, thinking that I've forgotten to announce something, which is probably true. So Molly Jo, if I did forget something, I apologize. But now let's move on to our Ask the Author question, shall we?
We shall.
James Earls asked me via... Okay, thank you. James Earls asked me via Facebook, what do you do when you want to write, but your mind is so cluttered with life's junk, most of it petty, like dumb arguments or anger, things that seem to get in the way of your writing? Not necessarily talking at writer's block here. The words are there, but other things seem to get into the way. And so the way I read that is simply, what do you do when you're too irritated to write, or even when you're too stressed out to write? You've got a lot of things on your mind. You've got bills to pay. You've got the day job. Your boss is giving you grief, whatever the case may be. There are times where we will sit down to write and we cannot concentrate because we're so distracted with the way our life is headed, whatever arguments we've had with family or friends or coworkers, etc. Whatever stresses are weighing on our shoulders. And it's really hard to focus on writing when that happens. And so there's a couple things that I would recommend. The first thing that I would do is recommend putting a schedule together to where you can deal with that stuff. Deal with it before you get to your writing time. So maybe you can shift your writing time around a little bit, or schedule the other things in your life that you need to deal with for a later time, so that you know from 10 a.m. till noon you're going to be writing, but at 12:01 you're going to call the phone company and make sure that your phone doesn't get turned off, or whatever the case may be. You might send off that email to your coworker or boss at 1 p.m., something like that, to where you can put your mind at ease knowing that you are going to take care of the matters at hand, but you just haven't done it yet. So I think a schedule is a good way to do that. I really advocate making sure that your life is in order so that you don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. Really protect your writing time. Make sure that others understand that this is important, and that it's got to be prioritized. And if you have an hour to write for that hour, not an hour and a half, because then if your family gives you an hour and you take an hour and a half, they're going to start to resent your writing. So you want to be diligent with your scheduling. That's what I would suggest to you. Make sure your life is as in order as possible. Schedule your writing along with the other things that you need to deal with, so that you're not necessarily running away from your problems, but at the same rate you're encouraging yourself to tackle the issues that you're facing. Pops, I'm not sure how you would handle that situation.
Yeah, it's always going to be tough. The problem with life is that, well, it's life, and as you live it, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be interruptions. But really, when you think about it, some of these things that we experience, whether it's family stress, job stress, illness, whatever it might be that distracts us from the writing, is really food for thought. It becomes fodder for other things. So the professional writers I know will have things like where they have to rush to the hospital because someone they know or someone they love has been in an accident, or there's an illness or something. And this sounds callous. They don't mean to be callous, but sometimes they'll confess that while they're there, they begin to log things away, the experience away, because it will help them later in a book. That's just part of their training. It's not saying they don't care. It's just all of a sudden they're very observant of what's going on around them. And so sometimes you can, as a creative person, use these interruptions and the emotions and stuff that go with this for later work. But I'm going to make another little argument here in just a little bit, but I wanted to get that part out there. And perhaps the best way I can illustrate this is back in my preacher days. One thing that every preacher does is funerals. They're not fun, but they're important nonetheless. And I had done a bunch of funerals, and then my mother died. And all of a sudden, I had a different perspective on the whole thing, on the funerals, on what the people were going through. So when I would stand up at the lectern at the mortuary, the chapel, wherever it is that we were doing this, at the graveside or something, I was no longer looking out at people who wanted me to do something for them. I'm looking at fellow wounded individuals. And that changed the way I worked with them. So that life experience, as negative as it was, and there have been many others since then, had prepared me and made me into something a little bit better for future work. And it's the same thing with life experiences here. If you haven't really had pain in your life, it's going to be hard to put that into a book. You can imagine it, but if you've really had it, then it's much more easy for the reader to believe, and you have new ways of expressing that. So sometimes the pain, the arguments, the relationship stresses, all of those things, if you've been through that, then really you're being given a gift. I hope you don't have those kinds of things, but nonetheless, if it's going to happen, then that experience can turn you into a better writer. But you hit on something very good, is you just have to make a special time. So I think of Jerry Jenkins, who had a job as an editor, but he also did a lot of freelance writing. But he didn't do any of his writing at home until all his kids were in bed. So he'd come home, he'd play with the kids, they'd have meals and stuff. Kids would go to bed, and then he would write sometimes into the wee hours. He ended up writing almost 100 books doing that. So he could get the thing done. But he really was living out what I call Al's axiom number 5, and that is you never sacrifice people for plot. People are more important than the writing we do. Hopefully we're writing something that's going to have some benefit for people, not just pure entertainment, but something to give them something to think about anyway. You don't sacrifice the people for plot. Now that sounds like a strange thing to say, and I know I'm belaboring this a little bit more, but it's the preacher in me. There have been some very famous writers who have done that. They've sacrificed their families, and we have a tendency when we read their bios or we see specials on them and stuff to think, well, they were a great writer because they did that. And I would say, no, that's not the case. That somehow all the other writers who were doing that didn't become great writers. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to mention his name, but a very famous writer, a very controversial book, had what amounted to a garage that he converted to an office, detached garage, and no one could go in there. And his daughter would sit out on the slope near the house and just try to look through the window so she could see her dad. At which point, he's not a great writer to me. He might be a great writer, but he's not a great person. And you don't get those things back. So as much as we love writing, as much as we live for writing, people still take precedence. Now, that being said, let me see if I can put another little twist on this, because I wasn't really quite sure what was being asked here. So in case I missed it with that, let me simply say this. When you're too irritated to write, or the words aren't coming, as it says in the question, I suggest you just keep writing. There is no requirement, no law, nothing written in stone from God's finger on the top of a mountain that says you can only write gold. If you can't make it perfect first time, you have no business being a writer. Professional writers write junk all the time. They just go back and edit. So you have permission to write garbage. If it's not coming to you, just keep writing, because the magic isn't in the first draft, it's in the rewrite. So you just keep going, and sometimes that fixes the problem. It unclogs the drain, and so the words will begin to flow again.
Agreed. I like how you say never sacrifice people for plot. I highly advocate that if you're writing and you're not published and you're just getting started and it's important to you, but nobody else understands why it's important. Number one, you've got to make them understand that it's important to you. Number two, you need to work with them to find a time that's going to work for you. I do kind of the same thing. I'll write, I get up early and I write then, so that when I'm at home, I'm daddy. During the summer, when I'm not teaching, I'll work in the morning. I'll kind of get up around 7 or so and I'll put in a few hours, but I'm doing it on my laptop out in the living room. So if the kids ever need me for anything, it's pretty easy for them to get my attention. And I tell them, daddy's working, I need some time, but if you need me, I'm here. And I think that's important. I'd rather have them grow up remembering that they could interrupt my work, that they were more important than my work. That's more important to me than them saying, my dad was a fantastic writer. I'd rather be a good dad first, and a good writer second. And so I like the way you say that, Pops. I don't buy into the theory that you have to be a cranky old alcoholic to be a fantastic writer. As a matter of fact, I think that could work against you in a lot of ways.
That's a myth,
yeah. You said that well, never sacrifice people for plot. So there you go. And while we're on the topic of asking the author, not sure if I mentioned it or not, if you've got a question that you'd like us to talk about on the air, or we can just answer it via email, aarongansky.com is a great way to do that, or firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Either way, it'll get to me and I'll give you an answer, and then we'll talk about it on air. So thank you, James Earls, for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, what you were saying there reminded me of something. There's an old joke about when you die and they put you in the grave and you have a tombstone there, a marker. What you really want it to say is loving father, loving husband. You don't want it to say, boy, he really worked hard.
Right.
So it's the same thing here. It's a loving father, loving husband, loving person, friend, whatever. Not, boy, he spent all his days writing and he sacrificed everything for it. I think that's just a bad thing. Enough of the sermon. But.
Yeah, I know. I'm tempted to keep going too, and just the idea that, as we've seen here, just based on this question, if you don't have your life in order, writing is going to be really difficult. It's going to just be really, really tough. And so the better you can keep your life in order, and the important people around you, the better your writing is going to be, because you're not going to have to worry about that kind of stuff. You're not going to be worrying about, your marriage or your kids or, whatever else in the back of your mind. You're going to be able to concentrate and focus, and that'll help out. So there is that. Now, on to our topic for tonight. We are still talking about plot and structure. And this week, we're going to be tackling scenes and outlines. Last time we tried to cover 2 topics. It took 2 weeks. So I think we can do this one a little more efficiently. And then next week, we're going to talk about chronological ordering versus non-chronological ordering, which should be a lot of fun. So make sure you tune in for that. But right now, let's talk about scenes and outlines. Quick little definition of what a scene is. A scene is a moment of drama. I like to think of it as a microcosm for your novel. It's got to have all the same elements, but in a more compact form. Obviously, you're not writing a 350-page scene here. You're writing a 1-page scene or a 2-page scene or a 4 to 5-page scene, whatever the case may be. All the elements of story have to be present in your scene. For example, you must have characters, you've got to have a conflict, and you've got to have some sort of resolution. Even if it's an open resolution like we talked about last week, you've got to have some sort of resolution there. Pops, what is a scene composed of other than just character conflict and resolution? Sure. Is there a more specific outline there for us?
Well, the scene is the basic unit of a book. You have the book. Those get broken down into chapters. The chapters are usually pretty arbitrary, sometimes forced because there's a change of location or time, that sort of thing. But the scene is really the best thing to focus on. The scene is the basic element of the book, just like a sentence is a basic element. Sentence is a basic element of a paragraph or anything else. So the scene really is the thing. It's the linchpin. And a scene has several things, and you've mentioned some of them: actors or characters. But those actors and characters need a place to do their acting. And so there needs to be a place, a setting for them. So in every scene, you're going to have characters. In every scene, you're going to have a setting. Otherwise, the reader gets confused. Now, if you've already established the setting, let's say it's a hotel lobby, and you've had a scene or 2 in there, then all you have to do is at least allude to, or just make it clear that that's where you are in this scene. You don't have to redescribe everything. Maybe this time the lobby's crowded, just so the reader knows where they are. Now you have actors, you have a place for the action to take place. That gives you the ability to put action into it, and that is the course of events, whether it's dialogue, physical conflict, loss, whatever it is. But there's going to be some action going on because that's all that a novel is. It's from beginning to end. It's a series of actions that take place regardless of the genre. And then it's my opinion that every scene should have some form of transition. And usually these are just a single line that the reader knows that's the end of that scene, but there's more coming. So I'm going to have to look for the next scene that comes after this. It ties into this, especially if you're doing multiple points of view in different locations and you just leave it hanging a little bit. That little transition keeps interest and makes the book into a page turner.
And it's not necessarily a cliffhanger ending all the time. There's a way to handle this too. For example, if you've got one chapter that ends with, sit down, Billy, we need to talk. And then the next chapter, the next scene begins immediately with, what do you mean you're pregnant? Billy exclaimed. Well, why are we switching scenes or chapters there? There's no break, and it's not a different point of view. It's not a different setting. It's not a different time period. That's just an arbitrary break. And so I like what you're saying here, Pops, is that transition might be something as simple as, we need to talk, Billy. That feels a little bit like a cliffhanger, but we don't actually have a car hanging off of a cliff or anything like that. Just something as simple as, a line that says, I'm trying to think of an example here. He wouldn't be able to go back home after this. Some sort of realization that the character has that speaks to an impact that the action is going to have on his or her life. Something like that. Is that what you mean by a transition?
Yeah, it could be. Or if you can leave them hanging a little bit, that is, you just don't solve everything in every scene. Otherwise, you end up with a whole bunch of tiny stories. with that, but it's going to be something that's introduced and it'll be fleshed out a little later. So if we start with your example, let's say it's a father talking to a son, and the father says, "Sit down, Billy, we need to talk." And then a little bit of narration says, "My father, who's been sober for 3 years, poured a large scotch." Now we know there's something bad. And you just end with that. You can move on to the next scene. You're in another locale, different characters, assuming using third person, not first person. You move on to the next thing, and then you're going to come back to that. Well, what the reader's doing is they're saying, wait a minute. If he's been sober for 3 years, what pushes him off the wagon? Why would he pour this large scotch? Well, they don't even know if it's for him. But if you just hang it there, that transition will keep the interest up.
Agreed. So one of the more popular questions about scenes is how long are they? And that could be, I mean, that's up to you. It really depends. I try and stay pretty consistent with my scene length, about 1,000 words. And the reason is my target writing goal is 1,000 words per day. Had a good day today. I tripled that, so that's nice. But for the most part, one scene is about 1,000 words for me. So that's going to be, some scenes are going to be 1,200, some are going to be 800, but it's right around in that neighborhood. And that's the only reason why I really try and keep it about that. I am sensitive to the scene. Some scenes that I've written, specifically in this last book, ballooned up to about 2,000 words instead of 1,000. But very, very few, and very rarely did I ever go over 2,000. I don't think I have any scenes over 2,000. And again, that's to help me budget my time and budget the pace of the story. That is not a hard rule. That is not set in stone. That may not describe what you want to do. I'm trying to think of examples. Think of Game of Thrones that'll have a chapter that's, you know, really a very long, prolonged scene that will go on for pages and pages and pages and pages, and that's fine. That's just not how I choose to do things. Pops, what do you see as far as the length of a scene is concerned?
I think the shortest scene I've ever written was 2 sentences, but that's very rare. I've done long scenes at 6,000 words, but that's very rare. It has to do with the scene, and that to me is the key. The scene dictates how long it's going to be. So I don't think there ought to be any rules on that. Now I do as you do. I have a basic idea how long a scene is going to be. And it might be right around there, about 1,000 words. It might be a little bit more depending on the nature of the book. But I also leave the freedom, give myself the freedom to write a very short scene if necessary, that's going to reveal something that's important, and then move the reader on. So how long should it be? It should be long enough to get that action and that transition in place for the reader so you can move on to the next thing. So I don't think we got to it yet. Everything that a scene must, okay, that's the next thing we'll be talking about. Things every scene must have. It needs to be long enough to get those things in that we're just about to talk about, those things in and dealt with properly. And some people, when they write, they will use scenes instead of chapters. James Patterson, for example, you get 75 chapters. Well, they're all scenes, really. There is no hiatus break. There's no shifting of point of view and stuff. It's just a series of scenes. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, the cinematic style. But so you have some freedom in it. The real thing is you just want to make sure that your scene gets the idea across in a tight, orderly fashion that's nicely written, that will help the reader make the next step up the long staircase of this plot.
I'm actually using that cinematic style in my current work, which is different than what I've done before. And I'm enjoying it. I don't know that it would work for every book, but it seemed like for this project, that was going to be what was going to work best. And so that's kind of what I've adopted there. I believe Odd Thomas does that as well. Dean Koontz has almost these micro chapters, flash chapters that are all about 1,000, each chapter is about 1,000 words or so, 2 pages, maybe 3. But that's also because he's doing scenes as chapters. He had like 122 scenes in that book, or chapters in that book, something like that. So The bottom line, though, is this: what is the scene? What does a scene do? How do you know that a scene is earning its place, as we like to say in the business? And the answer is it's got to be doing at least one of the following things, possibly more. The first thing is it needs to be developing your character. We need to learn something new about your character, or our understanding of your character needs to be deepened in some way. And if you've got multiple characters, you're going to have multiple scenes developing these multiple characters, and that's fine. If it's not doing that, it needs to be moving the story forward. I would argue that you should be developing your character as you move the story forward, and that moving the story forward does, in fact, develop your character at the same time if you're doing things well. It should resolve an earlier conflict, okay? So if we go back to the example of, sit down, Billy, we need to talk. He pours himself a glass of scotch. Then we've got another scene that's unrelated. It's in somebody else's point of view. It's in a different place and time. Then we come back. My father took a sip of his scotch and pointed at me with the hand that was holding the glass. I don't know, something like that. Now we're picking it back up where we left off, and we are resolving this conflict of, is my father 3 years sober going to fall off the wagon? And if so, what is it that's so bad that's going to push him to this point? So you could be resolving an earlier conflict. You might develop a new conflict. And in the sense that if you've got a character who's trying to kick the bottle, so to speak, I don't know if that's how you say it, but he's over at a friend's house and his friend is pouring 2 scotches and he has to be able to say no, but this is a new conflict. We've been dealing with something else, and now we're kind of dealing with this portion of our character, this interior conflict that's going to be a struggle for him. You can complicate an existing conflict, right? So I go back to the example of the man who wakes up thirsty and wants a glass of water, turns on his faucet, there's no water. Well, now we need to complicate that existing conflict. So he calls his wife and says, did you pay the water bill? And she says, I'm leaving you, Billy. I never loved you anyway. Now we're complicating this original conflict, which is, I'm really thirsty, and now my wife is leaving. So we're introducing a new one, I guess. I guess that's more of introducing a new one. Maybe he finally gets the water fixed, but now ninjas invade his house. Something like that, where you're complicating the primary conflict, which in this case would be the man who wants the glass of water. Or you can set up a future action. And this is really good. Foreshadowing is what we call this. And so I will use Harry Potter as an example, because in the first book, and I think it's kind of a common trope throughout the others, is that they are doing their homework on some sort of magical incantation, and they've got to write X amount of inches worth of paper, you know, and, you know, it's got to be so many inches thick and all this wonderful stuff. And just long, what I thought were relatively boring scenes of kids doing homework. And I thought, why am I reading this? And then I got to the end and they used everything that they had learned that year. And I thought, she was setting up a future action. That's what J.K. Rowling was doing. She knew where she was going and how she was going to get there. And so those scenes existed. They developed the character a little bit. They kind of moved the story forward, but not really. Really what it was doing is setting up that future action. So have I forgotten anything here, Pops?
No, I think that's right on. If you watch television or in movies, they will do this, where they'll establish that there's an object of importance there. So, for example, in a mystery, the sleuth will see a picture in a silver frame on a desk, and it'll be the father and the son. Let's say we're going to stay with him, and the son's wearing some kind of coat, a letterman's jacket, and there's nothing in that scene that says that's important, but it will be important later. Now, if you're watching it on television, anytime they do a close-up on something like that, you know it's going to be important. Or a gun in a drawer, then you know it's going to be important. Or the way they show a car or something like that, you know it's going to come about fairly soon, and it's going to be pivotal in the story. So scenes will often do that, and that may be its only purpose, is to introduce something that's going to be important a little bit later.
Absolutely. And I kind of lost my place there. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was looking at the chat room. See, this is what happens when we don't have Molly to monitor the chat room for us. We get sidetracked.
Well, we're going to talk about that there should be significant characters in the scene, and they need to have some kind of motivation. But now that needs to be significant characters, not just every character, because there are ancillary characters. I call them walk-ons. And it's like a waiter let's take our father and son, and they're at a restaurant now, and they're chatting things up, and the waiter comes and brings glasses of water. The waiter's not key to this, unless he's poisoning the water. He's not key. But you would expect in a restaurant for a waiter to show up at some time, so you need to introduce one. He's a walk-on. Usually I don't even name them. My rule was if they speak much, they get a name. But other than, what would you like to eat? I wouldn't buy that. I wouldn't eat that if I were you, kind of thing. So you can have insignificant characters, but they are catalysts. They help the story keep going and give a certain sense of realism to them. But the significant characters, the protagonist, the antagonist, supporting characters and the like, that's a whole different ball game, and they need to have some motivation going on there for them to be in that scene and for that scene to have any value.
Well said. And I will mention that the idea of character motivation is if your character has a motivation, then they are a significant character. And I'll use the example of my own writing, The Bargain, and I hesitate to use my own examples, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. But I had a waitress in there with one leg, and so when my primary character came in and sat down at the table farthest from the kitchen, she's irritated, and she's huffing and puffing and walking over there. And her motivation was, I don't want to have to walk all the way over there. I got one leg, and I have no idea what prompted me to do that, except that I liked the idea of a one-legged waitress, and I thought it would be funny. And so I put her in, and she had a motivation. And all of a sudden, because she had a motivation and she only had one leg, I realized this is a character that is significant, even though I had not planned on her actually being in the book. She ends up, I think, stealing the show. She's one of my favorite characters that I've been able to write, and her story becomes very compelling when my character finally unearths her story. I think it's a pretty compelling story, and so there's an example of a walk-on character who did more than just walk on. Be aware of characters that will steal the show. Now, if you don't want that, you're outlining your book and you just don't have place to add in an additional character, then they're just walk-ons. They, like you say, Pops, they drop off the glasses of water, the cups of coffee, and they're on their way. They serve as almost a rhythmic quality for your prose, to add a beat in between dialogue, to fill up a quiet moment of conversation. Whatever the case is, their purpose is going to be wildly different than the significant characters, the protagonists, the antagonists that are there on scene. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And sometimes, especially if you're an intuitive writer, discovery writer, you might be surprised that some of these insignificant characters do become important later. You may not know it at the time. I had a supporting character in Through My Eyes, the second book that I wrote, and the most recent self-published one. And I had one character walk out. Well, this guy filled the spot of the one that walked out. And I didn't know it at the time. I remember I was feeling kind of put out that my character walked off because I was in intuitive mode. Was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I realized this guy had been here all along, and somehow in my subconscious I knew that he needed to be a bigger part of the story, and he does. He becomes very important, as does the one who walks off. But so sometimes, even as we're writing, we don't know. It's when we get further into the book that these things begin to reveal themselves.
And what I like about the example that you've given, Pops, and I've read that book, and I've said it, I think, last week or the week before. That's one of my favorite books that you've written. A really quality book. I like all your stuff, but that one I remember is one of my favorites. So now that it's available, make sure you guys go to Amazon and get a copy of that, Through My Eyes. But what I like about your example, Pops, is this idea of motivation. And you were true to your character. You created a character, you gave your character a set of motivations, and then you asked yourself, what would a character with these motivations do in this particular situation? She would walk out. That's what she would do. And if you were to have looked at your outline and said, you know what, she has to stay in the story because I have to do A, B, and C, then the question becomes, why is she staying with the group? Oh, because she has to, because story, because I have to get where I think I need to be. Oh. Well, if you're true to the character motivation, like you say, Pops, you let her walk out, and then you find a way to deal with where they are. And your story, I think, sometimes becomes better at that point, because now it's taking a turn you didn't anticipate. And it's, I think, much more interesting to write that way. But that's not to say that outliners cannot do this. An outliner who has done his or her homework well will know their characters and their character motivations, and when they come to a scene where a character is going to walk out, they will have already allowed for that particular scenario. The problem comes when you outline, and your outline is so regimented, and you outline before you really know who your characters are. That can become problematic, because then you're going to have characters who end up acting inconsistently with their motivation, and that can be a real fault in your book, and a lot of readers will pick up on it. They won't like it. So one of the things that when you're writing a scene that you want to ask yourself is, what are my character motivations, and how are they different? How are they at odds? Good scenes are going to have characters whose motivations are at odds. Not both characters cannot have what they want. I go back to the Avengers, and I wrote a blog post about this. The first Avengers movie, when Thor comes down and steals Loki from Iron Man and Captain America, and Iron Man flies off after him. Well, now we've got Iron Man fighting Thor. Why? Because it's awesome. Like, people are paying money to see that movie. You put that in the trailer, you're selling tickets. That's why it's in there. But the writing of the film is so well done that you've got Loki and Thor communicating, and Thor's motivation here is to bring Loki back to the side of good. Loki's motivation is to cause as much trouble as humanly possible. Those motivations are at odds. Then you get Iron Man, who wants to take Loki back because, hey, Thor stole him from me. And Thor says, I'm not giving Loki up. So now their motivations are at odds, okay? And so the fight that ensues is believable and feels authentic rather than feeling forced. And you want to avoid prose that feels forced, that you've put together just for the sake of putting it together. Batman versus Superman. Sorry, did that slip out?
It did.
A little bit?
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit. So instead of saying, wouldn't it be cool if Batman fought Superman? Okay, but why are they fighting? Because it's cool. All right, but what's their motivation? And if you've seen the film, I feel like they did okay with Batman's motivation. There are some faults, but they did okay with Batman's motivations, but thought Superman's motivations were a little less clear. So instead of trying to say, this is going to be cool, I'm going to make it happen no matter what, instead be sensitive to your characters and their motivation. I feel like I've talked about that quite a bit. Pops, you want to take the next point here?
The point of view?
Yeah.
Scenes are usually governed by point of view, and they really help us handle point of view. Point of view, of course, is whose eyes you're seeing through. In third person point of view is you can jump from head to head, but you never jump from head to head in the same scene. First person point of view, the character's always saying, I did this, and you only get one point of view through the whole book. And that's that character's point of view. A lot of fun to write that way, but it does have limitations. Third person is a point of view. You got a lot of juggling going on. Well, if you're going to make a switch, you're in a particular chapter and you have a scene one in that chapter has a point of view of a male character, but now you want to do point of view from the female character, you put in a hiatus break. A hiatus break is that white line that you see in a printed book or even in an ebook. Sometimes it has a dingbat, which is just a small bit of art. In writing, you usually just put 3 asterisks there. So if you're going with a traditional publisher, they'll put in whatever dingbat, a little bit of art that they want to put in there. And that tells the reader that either we've changed point of view, we've changed time, or we've changed location. Usually a time change, to me, signals a new chapter. But sometimes it just works out that you're going to have that in the same chapter. Normally, it's just going to mean that you're changing point of view, and you're changing action, you're changing location. And I would do my best to leave time changes to chapter breaks. But in the early game, the first draft, it doesn't really matter. In fact, I'm going to encourage everyone a little bit later is to not worry about chapters, worry about scenes. Then you can break the scenes down into chapters later, and that's very easy to do. It's the scene that really matters, not the chapter. You get all that sorted out at the end, one of the last things that you do. So usually single point of view at a time, and if you're going to show any difference, you're going to switch any of those, the point of view of the character or the location, or if you're going to skip forward and backward in time, you at least need to call that out with a hiatus break, that white line with the 3 asterisks in it, or sometimes they put a pound sign in it. So go ahead.
Yeah, the next question that comes up is how many scenes do you put into a chapter? And you've kind of already mentioned this, and that is that the definition of a chapter is pretty nebulous. I would say that if you're doing chapters, you should probably have some sort of coherent reason for doing what you're doing rather than just arbitrary chapter headings. Maybe I'm going to break a chapter at the end of every day, or I'm going to break a chapter with every time I switch point of view from this person to that person, or I'm going to switch chapters after I have had 1 or 2 scenes with all of my protagonists' point of view, something like that. But have some sort of cohesive reason, coherent reason, and cohesive strategy for your chapter breaks. That being said, I've read several books that have hundreds of chapters, 112 chapters, and I've read other books that have 3 chapters. It's really up to you. It's your call. What is it that you want to accomplish? In my current work in progress, I've already mentioned that each scene is going to be its own chapter, and that's because I switch points of view often, and I want the feel of kind of that changing cast, and so I want to do that. I want to be able to kind of have that rotating cast here, and it's important because their viewpoints are so wildly different that I think it's important that they are contained within their own chapters. Now, on the other hand, in the Hand of Adonai series, it's not what I do. I'll have a couple viewpoint characters, and they'll each get a scene or 2, and I'll usually break a chapter after I've kind of kept the reader up to date on each of the different branching paths. So the group is together here, but in the next chapter they take their separate ways, and so you want to see it from her point of view and his point of view, and now these characters are in a different place at the same time. They've split up, and so now I need, so I kind of do it that way. And so there the chapters are a little bit longer than they're going to be in the Implausibles. It really depends on the book that you're writing, and what you're trying to accomplish with chapters. So is that kind of how you do chapters, or do you have a different guideline for it?
Yeah, that is one of those things is sort of a judgment call for me, especially since most of my books have been written intuitively, though I do outline, and there's a lot to be said for outlining. I don't have a set number of scenes per chapter, and usually, again, there's been either a passage of time or some significant event in the last scene that says we're ending this section so we can start another. There's always a chapter break at each plot point, 25% of the way through, the mid-story bump at 50% of the way through, and 75% of the way through. So you got at least 3 of those chapters. And then I also keep in mind the fact that the age in which we live now is the reading attention span of most readers is declined. It's shorter. That's partly because of time, family demands, those sorts of things, television, movies. There's so much, Facebook and everything else that is taking up people's time, that shorter chapters and lots of shorter scenes work better for most readers now. Also gives them a chance they can stop reading if they have to get up, go do something. I'm at the end of this scene, I know where to come back. So that's kind of utilitarian, I suppose, but we always keep the reader in mind.
Absolutely. So which is right for you, which is right for the book. So you might write one book with the micro chapters, you might write another book with super long chapters. It's really what you're trying to accomplish and what best serves the book. So we are running out of time, but I think we'll be able to get through outlining. We're going to handle this kind kind of quickly, so we'll go through real fast. And I do want to make sure that we get a chance to pop in with the room and kind of, they've been sharing comments and questions throughout the night, and I want to make sure that we get to those. But an outline simply is a comprehensive list of the scenes in your novel. The question, the age-old question, do you have to outline, or can you write by the seat of your pants? Are you a discovery writer, intuitive writer? Is there a combination of the two? There is, and we've said this before, Pops. It's really what works best for you. How are you most productive? I outline very, very rough, very vague sketches, usually about 5 scenes ahead of where I'm writing. And so when I'm done for the day, I have the next 5 scenes that I could theoretically write the following day. And then at the end of the day, I know where I'm going, want to go the next day, so I'll add a couple more quick little outlines of the following scenes. It's like driving at night with your headlights on. You can't see all the way to your destination, but you can see far enough to get yourself there. I feel like I lifted that quote from Stephen King or some other writer. I'm sure somebody will find it, but
you'll get a bill.
I'm sure I will. Yeah, copyright law. So now, what information, if you are going to outline, what information should you include about your scene? Well, you're going to want to include a few things. First of all, the point of view from which the scene is told. And these will all be on the show notes. So if you feel like I'm going too rapidly, again, aarongansky.com. I should have the notes up tomorrow morning sometime. You'll be able to kind of look at that at your own leisure. But you'll want to make sure that you're including the point of view from which the scene is told. What the scene is going to do for the novel, and we talked about this earlier, what each scene does. It's furthering the plot or introducing a new character or heightening the tension or the conflict, introduces a new mystery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A rough estimation of word count or pages, this is not necessary, but if you're going to outline your entire novel, I think this is a benefit so that you can have a rough idea of how many pages you're going to need to hit, how many words you're going to need to hit to find your goal. Then I would contrast that with the actual word counts of end pages. So you anticipate writing 4 pages on this chapter and you only wrote 3. Okay, you now know that you need to add a page in someplace else if you want to hit your 350 or whatever your mark is. A short summary, and I'm talking very short, 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences of the action of the scene. And remember, there should be action. The scene where you have one person thinking to himself or herself while lying on their bed is boring. So make something happen. What's the action? What are they doing? Even if it's just tossing a tennis ball in the air and catching it while they're thinking about their failed romance, whatever it is, let them do something, have some action there. So you just need a short summary of that. Here's a quick example I'll give for you. Point of view might be from Sam. The action is going to be Sam calls Sally. He has her on speakerphone while he shaves. Okay, now we've got some sort of action. He's shaving while he talks on the phone. I don't know why. I just came up with this quickly. Don't analyze it. The conflict is that Sam and Sally are breaking up. She wants her freedom. He's ready to settle down. The goal is going to be to develop the conflict of the broken relationship. It also introduces the mystery of the other man. Bum, bum, bum. An estimated word count is 800 words. The actual word count is 950 because he, cut himself shaving at the end and was worried he was going to bleed out. I don't know. But that might be a kind of a quick example of an outline. Pops, have I missed anything on that?
No, I think that's a good idea. I used to do it in Microsoft Excel. I used to do it in a spreadsheet. And I'd have the scene and I'd have those things, whose point of view, and just a line about what's going to happen with that. I didn't estimate word count. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you remain flexible. One of the problems that some people have is if they write it down, they think, now it has to be that way. So some people will have a problem saying, I estimate it's going to be 800 words. Oh man, I failed at 750. Now, you didn't fail. It's just a guideline with that. And so outliners are very good about changing things. You start off with that idea. Okay, this is what I think is going to happen, and I work on this for a while. But I know, and when I've outlined, this happened to me many times, that scenes that I have said I'll need to write, I don't need to write because the action popped up in another scene. So I just throw it away. I knew that action was going to happen somewhere. I thought it would be a whole scene. It wasn't. Or I will add a scene. It'll come to me. So You have to be flexible enough to add a line here, a scene there, take a scene out. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're tying up your creativity. We are not slaves to the outline. The outline is a guide. The outline is a way of getting our conscious and subconscious to talk to each other enough to get started on the project.
I agree. I think that's important to remember, that the outline is not the story. It is the bones. It's the structure, but it's not the end all be all. Nobody's going to go pay $15 to get your outline. You know, they're going to pay $15 to read your novel. There's a difference. So the other thing that you can do, and I would suggest this, especially Pops, you did this in Excel, and I think I stole your outline format for my first novel, which is unpublished because it's not good. But the only way, yes, absolutely.
I see.
Yeah, I stole your outline, and the book was terrible. No, the book was terrible because it was my first book and I was learning how to do this, but I found myself continually getting so stymied I could not move forward. And so I took a couple of days and did the outline based on your thing, the spreadsheet that you had, color coordinated it by point of view character. So I was able to see how much was too much from this character and what other characters were being left out, etc. And at some point, that was really the only way that I was able to finish. Now I use Scrivener, which kind of allows you to outline as you go, which is a really nice feature. It will allow you to color coordinate things so you can see your point of view characters. And I can easily match that, okay, in this chapter, I've got these 4 points of view, but I'm missing this one particular point of view. So I've got to put that in there, whatever the case may be. So that makes things a lot easier. If you don't use Scrivener, it's very affordable. And if you're writing novels, I would really highly recommend it. It's very good because it allows you to kind of outline as you go, and it gives you a place to put your summary, the title of your scene, the point of view from which it's told. You can drag and drop scenes from location to location without having to copy and paste everything. It really kind of helps me as a discovery writer keep track of where I am and where I'm going, because it will have just in the window on the left-hand side, my thing is reversed on the left-hand side here, there we go, will just be like a list of the titles of all the scenes that are coming up. And so if I need to go back and change something, I just click on it, find it, change it, etc. So it makes things a lot easier. And if you're an intuitive writer like me, that might be just enough organization to get you through your book. If you're a comprehensive outliner, you're a diehard outliner, maybe you start with Excel and use that, and you just have that open as you write in Microsoft Word or whatever the case may be. But things to consider. So
yeah, Scrivener is very good. I just want people to get the idea that if they have to go out and buy something like that, you can use pencil and paper. The old way was 3x5 cards, and you just sit down and write out the action and the point of view character right on the card, and then you can start shuffling around any way you want. Well, Scrivener does that digitally, and so when you move it on that left-hand bar that you were talking about, it will move it in the manuscript too. So if this scene needs to be 2 places forward, not only will it move where you have it on the scene list, it'll move it, all the text that you wrote about that, it will cut it and paste it for you. So there is that advantage, but you can use just about anything. The idea is to get a list of scenes. And I recommend in outlining, again, don't worry about chapters. Just write down, again, depending on how big a book you're planning on writing, but let's say you're going to do a 350-page book, write down 70 things that happen. Those are your scenes. And you might end up with 80, you might end up with 60, who knows? But start with 70 and just start writing down. This happens, and then this happens next, and then this happens next, and this happens next. And that'll tell you who your point of view character is and whether or not your story is flowing. And once you have that nice and comfy, then you can go the next step in the writing.
Absolutely. So got a couple comments from the room here. Tess has been very active telling us about her the length of her chapters and points of view characters and things of that nature, and Becky Lindsay as well. Becky Lindsay does ask, though, she says, I land somewhere in between outlining and flying by the seat of my pants. I mean, I have the main points, but the rest just flows. Is this normal or recommended? I started with a full outline and felt suffocated. And I think, Pops, yeah, that's fine. Again, what works best for you? If that's how you finish the book, then that's how the book gets done. Nobody is going to check your work. They're just going to look at the final product. So would you agree with Pops?
Yeah, I would. I've been encouraging my students over the years is to find out how your brain is wired, and it's not the same. There is no best way of doing it. The best thing to do is write a great book. It doesn't matter how you write it. Just write a great book. And so I've done both where I've had no outline at all. I've just started with page one. I had an opening scene, and then it just goes from there. Then I've had them where I've outlined in detail. I like both. It varies. On the Harbinger series, a couple of the books I did, I fully outlined, and the last one I did, I didn't outline at all because I didn't have the story yet. The story was revealing itself slowly. So, although I don't like the phrase "seat of the pants," because it implies that the intuitive writer isn't thinking about this, and I don't know anyone who thinks more about their books than intuitive writers. They think about it constantly because they don't know what the next few steps are. So that's always on their mind. It's just when they put the stuff down. Real detailed outliner puts all that energy up front. Intuitive writer can't quite get it all figured out. They prefer to discover stuff, and so they do it as they go. All that matters is you end up with a publishable book.
Exactly. Yeah, I tend to think that intuitive writers do more work on the back end, the revisions and edits, and outliners spend more time up front before they actually do their writing to get all that stuff hammered out first. They're both spending the same amount of time. It's just a matter of, do you want to do it at the beginning or at the end? Or if you're like me, a little as you go both ways. So there's that. Tess also says, I try to keep POV characters to 2 or 3, but I'm beta reading a book right now that has at least 10 point of view characters. At what point is too much? So my answer to that is, I think the most points of view I've ever used in a novel is probably like 6 or 7. So that's definitely the limit. I wouldn't go beyond that because I haven't. So
so no one else can.
So yeah. Nobody else can. George R.R. Martin just doesn't know what he's doing at all, having like 222 point of view characters. I'm not sure how many he has, but I think this just goes back to, what does the book demand? What does the book need? Does the book need 2 or 3 point of view characters? Great. And the one that I'm currently working on, again, it's fresh in my mind because I've been working on it for the last few months. And it's very different than the other books that I've done. In this case, I've got 5, I think, point of view characters, and all of them are necessary because they see the world in different ways, and they provide unique experiences that cannot be fully understood unless you're inside that character's mind. And I wanted to give the reader that option to be able to experience these events through the eyes and the ears, etc., of these 5 characters, and I wanted them to be able to see the contrast. So when the 5 of them see the same event, how they tell about that event is going to be different as well. And in the process of seeing things from multiple angles, the character, or rather the reader, is able to put together a more comprehensive idea of what's actually going on. I forgot to mention that 5 of the 6 point of view characters are unreliable narrators. So in order to get an idea of what's happening, you need the one reliable narrator, and you need to be able to put things together from the multiple perspectives. There's that. With the Hand of Adonai series, I started with 3 point of view characters, and then in book 2, I add another one, so it's up to 4. And then I think in book 3, I add like 1 more, so I'm up to like 5, etc. And the reason is because the story is growing, people are in different places, they can't all be at the same place at the same time, and so I've got to balance several different story threads. That's a very long answer to a very short question. How about you, Pops?
Yeah, I don't like to apply too many rules on that. Otherwise, we get formulaic in it. What really matters is the story. And if you need 10 point of view characters, then you use 10. If you only need 2, then you need 2. So sometimes it's governed by genre. If you're writing a mystery, even if you're doing it in third person, you're not going to have many points of view because it's too easy to give away the plot and give away the mystery. If you're writing fantasy, you might have quite a bit more. I'm reading a sci-fi book right now that probably has at least 10 point of view characters in it. It's a longer book, it's 525, 550 pages, something like that. It's under 50,000 words of book. So, it's probably one reason it's that long, but the story demands it because of the unique nature of the story. So let the story dictate it. You're going to have, if it's third person, I shouldn't say you're going to have. You can do third person with one point of view, but you're probably going to have 3 or 4 in most third person point of view thrillers, supernatural suspense, action, adventure, those sorts of things. But you can have quite a few more, especially in fantasy and the like, where the books are longer.
Yeah. Tess has saved my bacon once again. The quote that I was trying to reach for earlier was, "Writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way." E.L. Doctorow, Writers at Work, the Paris Review interviews. The thing that I like about that for me is outlining a few scenes ahead is turning my headlights on. And there have been several times where I've been driving at night in the fog with no headlights, and that's not a fun writing experience. And so it's worth it for me to take just a few minutes to turn those headlights on and find out where I'm going in the next 4 or 5 scenes. So Mary Ruth has popped on, and she talks about, she outlines as a timeline in history. And so she uses historical timelines as her outlines, which is great because she writes historical fiction. Tess mentions that she uses Scrivener, but she's still learning how to use it. So I'm going to recommend something for you, Tess, is Uvi Zolkowski, I believe is his last name. If you look up Uvi, Y-U-V-I, look up Scrivener from My Point of View by Uvi, and it'll pop up. There is some language in there, just going to let you know. But it's hilarious and funny, and it will kind of teach you the ins and outs of Scrivener and how to use Scrivener, and you'll enjoy it while you go through it. So, but there is a little bit of a content warning. We had him on, early in our podcast. It was like within the first year of our podcast. He's a great guy. So if you get a chance to dig really far back in the archives, it's a 2-parter with UV, and he's just hilarious. He's just a really good human being. So you can dig those up. So there is that. Oh, wait, sorry. Becky pops in with one last question. She says her novel is YA, 12 to 18 years. She has 4 girls as main characters. Each chapter is from one of the 4's point of view. Is this too complicated for my audience? I don't think so. I heard somebody say at this writers conference that they can't sell YA fiction within multiple points of view. And I disagree with that. I think they're more than capable of reading books with multiple points of view, especially as long as it's clear whose point of view you're writing from. Toni Morrison writes from like 16 different perspectives, but she never tells you whose perspective she's writing from. And all of her characters are so similar. Like, I just don't know who's talking about what, when. It's very confusing. Look at Game of Thrones. Each chapter is titled with the name of the character from whose point of view it's told. So if you adopt a similar structure, I think you're fine. Readers are smart. So there is that. I think we are done. Pops, any last words on scenes and outlines?
No, it's a big topic, but I think we got it started there.
Indeed. So if we left anything out or you have any questions, just let us know. Again, AaronGansky.com or firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Next week, we'll be taking a look at plot and structure, chronological versus non-chronological structure. Should be a lot of fun. Don't forget to ask the author, and you can find us at altongansky.com, aarongansky.com, and franklyMyDearMojo.com. We do appreciate you guys listening. It means a lot to us. Thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.